Hi everyone, I'm Kaylee Bateman with Mixing Light, and I'm here today to talk with Fergus Hally, who is an incredibly amazing colorist who I'm just so glad to be here talking with today. I've always admired his work, and I'm so excited to hear what he's got to say to shed some light on the Dailies colouring process, but also to talk to me in general about his career and the incredible highlights that he's seen. Working as long as he has in the film and television industry. We worked together a long time ago when you were working as a freelancer, and I got to assist you a few times. And I really loved assisting you because you have such an incredible technical mind and you have such a strong grasp of the technology and all of the different parts of the process.
Well, thanks. That's a very generous introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you, Kaylee.
I've brought you here today to have a little chat with me about Dailies colour processes. You've done a few little movies, and when I say a few little movies, I mean some of the biggest films in the world you've been the Dailies colorist on. Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Lady and the Tramp, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and Thor Love and Thunder. They're amongst many more on the list of Dailies colour that you've delivered for some really huge films. I wanted to check with you why Dailies colour is so important.
So many reasons, but I think the most important reason is representing the cinematographer. You know, their vision at that point should be captured, and because of the process of editing and everyone sitting in front of those pictures for an extended amount of time, people become very used to that. And so, if we don't feed that with a good looking image, you know, we have so much latitude in digital files these days. You can do anything with anything at any point in time. But how the DP felt on the day that they shot it, I think is, you know, kind of key to the ongoing process, right? And sometimes it really does depend on the film, how much, for the use of a better term, interference I get involved in. You know, it's like sometimes it's just making sure that what is lit is represented as well as possible. Other times there is, like on Venom, there is a whole process of like a DI process which happens to the image in order to really embellish it with what the DP hoped and dreamed for and hopes for the future of that shot. I think that's important, but I also think when you're in the seat as a Dailies colorist, it's also you're like this point of reference for the production. So you're not just there to do this color thing. You're there if there's any questions about the image, and you're there to give them reassurances or, you know, prove or fail stuff. Very rarely have I had to fail anything, but you know, it's more a case of, is this a problem? We saw this when we were shooting. Can you check it? You check it. You give them feedback. Or it's like VFX are looking at something, they want to come and just review it and see what they can do with the image, so that when they take it onto the next stage, they're aware of it. So you just become this sort of like a counselor a little bit to the film sometimes. You know, it's like you're this safe spot that people come to just get a bit of reassurance what's happening with the image. And I think that's part of what I like about the process. You know, with experience, you see there's always things that happen cyclically. And so when you've seen it before, you can answer those questions fast, and you can, you know, deal with people's worries. And yeah, it's cool.
Just to give everyone a bit of an idea of where the Dailies colour process sits, when a film is shot, there's a Dailies colorist often who is in charge of making sure that everything looks correct for when it's transcoded and proxies are sent off to editorial. And basically, and correct me if I'm getting this definition wrong, but because you are absolutely expert, but you're making sure that the look from set is finding its way in either metadata or being transcoded and burnt into images for the editorial process throughout the pipeline that then comes after the shoot.
Yeah, so the way I like to describe it to people, and people who've worked with me will have heard this before, we're like the pinch in the hourglass. So, everything that happens before the camera, and then there's everything that happens after the camera, and that's post. But at that point, the pinch in the hourglass, there's a fair amount of pressure there. The Dailies department has there's two levels to it. There's the data level, which I think is pretty much, probably is seen by a lot of people as the primary level, because is the data safe? Has everything been archived? Is there multiple copies? Can we clear the camera cards? Can we strike sets? That level of stuff, which is a very sort of production pragmatic side of things, is what happens at the sort of core of the base of the Dailies process. Then at the top, the next level, or my level, if you like, the image level, we've got, and depending on the film, and there isn't always a Dailies colorist. Sometimes there is a DIT on set, and they are setting color values based on what they see, and sending CDL values to the lab where they're doing the archiving, and they apply those CDLs kind of without any management other than input output, and they'll QC the renders to see if there's any, sparkle in the image, if there's any sensor dropout, or if there's any render issues or anything like that. But really, there's no creative recourse in that setup. That's where the Dailies colorist comes in, and it really depends on the film, and it depends on the cinematographer, and it depends on the production and how much money they want to spend. You find that the bigger VFX movies, they like to have a Dailies colorist because they like to have someone they can call on to say, WTF, what's the image doing? And you can go, well, it's fine. We just, we printed it down a lot today. Oh, okay. So there is plenty in there. Yes, there's plenty in there. So that's
right. So you're really responsible for the negative and for the understanding of the negative in a lot of ways. Then, if they're coming to you with those kind of questions, they're saying, is the neg okay? Are we going to be able to achieve what we have been asked to achieve with this image?
In the sort of responsibility terms, the DIT is probably responsible for the negative.
Right.
But what happens is between the DIT and the delivery of dailies, the image can change, right? Because there could be a grade applied. And so that's where the question would come from. It's like, how much is in there? Because they don't really know. They could, they're just assuming. They can always assume the worst, almost, but you just say, no, there's plenty in there. So.
When you're talking about visual effects films, you're often talking about films that have quite a complicated image processing pipeline attached to them, and different color spaces are going to be utilized at different parts of the process to achieve all of the visual effects, and also to achieve, a very cinematic or interesting look. These kinds of films always have very big looks to them. They're not just like a soft touch. So I suppose, how much responsibility do you have in understanding that pipe and implementing that pipe?
Oh, look, it really does depend on the film. The bigger films, especially the Marvel films, I have the benefit usually of image support from Marvel and image support from probably whoever's doing the DI. A lot of the time what happens in those situations is someone's got a show lot they liked, and the show lot will get supplied, but the DP will like to just want to make it their own. So there'll be some edits to the LUT. And so there's some development happens there on that. And at that point, I then would refer to color scientists like, Matthew Tomlinson or John Cortell, or it's all those sorts of people who are, geniuses at this stuff, and they would check the tolerances on my LUTs and make sure that they're good. The wonderful thing is that, particularly Matthew Tomlinson, a very generous person with their knowledge. So through working with those people, you learn and you learn and you learn. So some films, I'll manage that myself, depending on who and what I'm dealing with.
Please tell me if this sounds correct. The DIT is going to create a CDL, and that CDL is going to come to you. that CDL is going to sit underneath the show LUT, and then what do you do with it? What happens next?
Don't tell the dits, but usually I just look at the stills and I don't apply the CDLs.
I won't
It
tell
really
them.
does depend on the show as well. What I do is I usually land it, grade it where I think it looks. I look at their still, and then I will load one of their CDLs to see how different I am. And as long as I'm happy that I feel I can go in the right direction. And also, it's also to see, most of the time, if I'm lucky, and it doesn't happen with everyone, but if I'm lucky, the DP will come and see me at the end of the day, and he'll see what I'm doing, and he'll go, good. And sometimes he'll make edits. And sometimes he'll go, let me see what I saw on set. And so I'll show him what he saw on set, and he'll go, I like this, I like that, I don't like that, I like this. And then we'll make a decision, or we'll land somewhere in the middle. I think if I wasn't able, or I didn't establish myself to do that in this role, then I wouldn't get so much from it, because I'd be a copy and paste monkey. And that is, for me, probably where I diverge from, being a purist in that sort of sense. So.
Yes, I've seen some of your dailies grades, and I know that I can't really talk too much about the specifics, but I will say, and I think this is something that doesn't violate any kind of confidentiality, your dailies grades go beyond what I would expect to see from a dailies grade.
I'll just interject there, right? So the particular show we're talking about, the Venom show, was quite different to, say, working on a Marvel show where there's an explicit rule about use of CDLs, right? So I am kind of crowbarred into working in a CDL space. That's because VFX pipelines around the world have, scripted workflows that can apply and use those CDL values to make their workflows efficient. As soon as you step beyond CDL values, then you have to have some kind of plugin or something to make those extra colors work. And in the case of the job we did, we used a BLG workflow, which is from Bayside, which allowed us to put more stuff in, whether it all got used, but it allowed us to give us, as an idea, set more of a look. And that particular DP, Robert Richardson, always likes to work like that. So he wants full DI kind of vibe. And so that, as much as it is a lot of work to take on board, ultimately you get a better result and you get a much more interesting thing to look at. And, I think that affects creative editorial decisions, all sorts of stuff, whereas if you give someone a generic looking image, I think that it's got to play in the editor's mind, when they're working.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you infuse the images with a mood and with a visual language that they otherwise wouldn't have, right? So that can't help but create interesting opportunities for storytelling beyond the edit and beyond, the visual effects.
Yeah. And I think that, so the way that we were able to work around that, in some of the Marvel movies, is to actually work with developing look LUTs. So what we did on Love and Thunder to sort of extrapolate or grow the CDL workflow was to come up with some. Baz Idoine, the DP, had some ideas about certain looks he wanted for certain scenes. And so we developed lookup tables that basically did crazy color transform looks, which could be applied on top of the CDL values.
And you're talking about an LMT, a look transform?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that, just to fill everyone in, and please, again, correct me if I'm getting this definition wrong, but that is the theory behind that is that you're working scene referred, and the display transform might be within the LUT or it might be within your color management, and the LMT is going to alter the image without any kind of display transform. It's just a color transform and perhaps a contrast transform, but it's creative.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. And I did another show down in Melbourne, Better Man, which we did something similar with, which is where we instead of wrapping the show LUT and the color transform up into one show LUT, we kept them separate, and we had an LMT and a show LUT. And a transform LUT working into Rec 709. The idea being that you could swap out the transform from the Rec 709 to another color space and still maintain the look as a independent part of the process.
So that is I think an amazing thing to be able to do, and this is what I mean about you being such an incredible technical mind and having such an in-depth understanding of the whole production process, because you are able to foresee the flexibility needed at the different parts of the production process, beyond your dailies color, because you're working with really high latitude log, probably raw data mostly, and you're then reviewing it for Rec 709 monitoring in the context of your dailies color space. And correct me if I'm wrong there, but I would imagine that you're mostly working in Rec 709 for dailies color rather than working in a theatre in P3. But I could
correct.
be wrong.
Correct. That seems to be the people prefer that. That seems to be the, and it's all SDR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but then what you want then is the flexibility of the decisions that you're making being decoupled from those device transforms, and your work is then more flexible and more useful for different departments who might be working in linear light space, or they might be working in an Avid, or they might be reviewing things on Pix, in their offices.
I think that's kind of like it's just a philosophy, really. It's like you want to keep everything as flexible and as soft for as long as possible. That kind of less rendering, more flexibility, metadata only kind of stuff is where it's going.
So all of these files that we're talking about are all sidecar kind of metadata files.
Absolutely, yeah.
CDL and LMT, a LUT. They might get baked into the image to create the dailies output for the executives to watch and for on-set people to watch, and they will get baked in for editorial, but that they will be metadata that accompanies the neg, and there will be information that helps the DI and the VFX vendors to match up that grade to that shot as it moves through all of its steps.
Yeah, that's the golden goal, right? Absolutely. It's and I think that's what our friends at Filmlight have tried to do with BLG.
Yes.
There doesn't
which is more complicated, right?
Well, it's not. It's not. It just seems complicated because
right.
it's it's the only thing in that space that can do that sort of thing. So basically something that can transport more than just CDL values and can accompany the shot everywhere, which, in a perfect world, you get your raw data, you archive it, you then stream that raw data to the cloud in its raw form, you make your color decisions, send those into the cloud in a raw, and then they just get pulled to the Avid as raw even, and the color data sits above it like a lookup table, a soft version of, which means that someone wants to update something, they just update the metadata and the stuff in the Avid changes. And the same, it's like if someone wanted to watch the dailies, wanted to be watched by a studio exec on whatever streaming service that they call it, and today's grade version gets applied to it when they watch it on their laptop or whatever,
Right.
that idea that everything is just that rendering, the creation of the stuff that you don't need, and that, filling up drives with data that you don't need,
And
just,
taking up the time, because I think that, aside from the archive process and getting the rushes on LTO, it's the time of rendering the dailies.
I think we're lucky now with processing power. I think, yes, if we were, 5 years ago, rendering was an absolute pain, but today we can render at, 80, 120 frames a second, and it's
Fabulous.
not, it's like we're in a different world than we were. So rendering it's more just that flexibility of being able to change things on the fly and not have things baked in, so that things can change easier. Metadata flies around. Different applications like VFX, as you say, can say, this is what they did. Okay, right. And if there's changes while it was in the edit, once, because once you start cutting things together, there's always going to be tweaks and changes, right? Because there just is, and so, but those tweaks and changes could exist as metadata that just pops back up in. So when the DI comes, those changes are already in the DI.
Actually, that gets to another question that I've got for you, which is how much of what you're doing is trying to create those cut points. Like, it must be so difficult when you've got a very long shot and they might use 1 second of it to know what section to match to another shot, right?
Yeah. It's I have a, yeah, yes. Well, especially when you're working in a CDL situation with no dynamics, and all you've got is one set of numbers. You have to pick some point, especially if it's like, we go indoors and then we go outdoors. So sometimes they'll ask for 2 passes, but very rarely. So you just have to either find some medium, which is usually a compromise, and then that will be fixed later. But when I work with Bob Richardson, he's like, I'm full dynamics, chasing things. The fact that the software is designed to track little shots, I'm chasing someone's face over like a minute and a half of a blooming scene because they walk in behind a pillar and then out behind a pillar and then down a corridor and then yeah.
That's incredible. So when you do that kind of a grade with Bob and you're looking at absolutely everything in the frame and you're treating it like a DI, is he coming to you at the end of the day? So he's just done his shoot day and he's sitting with you for a few hours in the evening?
No, so the way it works is it's a flow throughout the day.
Right.
So and really it would depend on shooting schedule, when things happen, but quite often it'll be, if I haven't seen him before call, I'll see him pretty soon in the morning after the first setup, and we'll look at the first setup for the day there and then in the van on set, and we will set a look for that setup. And at that point, if he has enough window, I might show him something I did the day before, or I might save that for a review that we'll do at the end of the day. For maybe I might have him for between half an hour and an hour, to go through all the different shots from the different scenes. Yeah.
Right. And does that mean then that you get to avoid the scourge of Dailies color, which is the crazy hours and working overnight?
Well, that's the wonderful thing about that work process, is that you work. It's a long day because I usually start before call and end a good hour after call. So it's not a short day, but it's a day, and it's alongside everyone else in the production. So, it feels a little more like the inertia of the team keeps you going.
Right. Right.
Whereas when you're sitting by yourself in the middle of the night, which I've done a few times, that is the least glamorous part of Dailies Color. It is absolutely, and that is a reason why I think a lot of people don't last at it for a long time.
it can be a job that people do once and they
Absolutely.
say, that's it. I'm done.
Absolutely. And I totally get it. But I would say that everyone who wants to be a colorist should do it at least once. Just
I
because
100% agree with you there.
you will be exposed to more images than you will be in any other way. So and your eyes and your reaction time and your motor skills will just accelerate, because you'll do a lot of repetition, but your ability to see things and respond to them quickly will just be so much better. So much better.
It's like you're getting your 10,000 hours and you're doing it in an intensive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're also, the kinds of films that do get dailies color are typically the larger films that have the better cinematographers attached to them. So you're not looking at just any old image intensively. You're looking at some of the best images
Yeah.
intensively.
Yeah. And I've been lucky to work with some incredible cinematographers, so, and that for me, that's that feeds something which, and I think I really like being part of a team, and I think that when you're a freelance colorist, you definitely can feel a little bit like, it's you sort of, a lot of the time, commercials, definitely, you feel like you come in sort of at the end of a process, right? And so you don't feel, and so that's a very short period of time. When I go on to do dailies on a film, I sit with a team for 3 or 4 months, and I make friends, and I have bonds with people, and life changes because of those connections, and that's pretty important to me, because there isn't a hub of colorists in Australia. We're a desperate bunch, and there's some really talented and clever people in this country, but I think we're all so just off doing our own thing. And there's I'm going to say this because I didn't really want to refer to a previous interview, but when you were talking to Vincent on the last interview, sure. And he's at Harbour, and he's there, and he's got all that support and people to discuss things with, and that's always been the most important thing for me in these dailies jobs. Is like, I get to talk to one of the best color scientists on the planet.
Yeah.
I get to troubleshoot new problems in image workflow with these people, and then that stuff's exciting. But that stuff's happening here in Australia, but we're all just working it out by ourselves, it feels like, and there's no one to support each other, or maybe there is, but it's just like, I'd really like to come up with a solution where we can have that space for us all. There's a lot. I've always had a problem with knowledge is king. I like sharing knowledge, and
you've always been so generous.
I think most people do like to share knowledge, and I haven't got the answer. But I do feel like that we, as a group of image professionals, could raise our international presence if we could unify in some way. Having these conversations and making them a bit more public, and that everyone's knows a good chunk of it, but not everyone knows all of it. There's a lot of moving parts in a daily situation, right? And there is often, I don't think there has been a show that I have worked on that there hasn't been some minor fuck up, right? Which is like, some bit of metadata was missed off a fucking something, or the wrong framing was applied to a bunch of rushes, or something. Stuff that happens, as we've gone and developed in the working process of dailies, we've worked out these problems happen a lot, and now there is automation that stops a lot of these things happening, I should add. I'm just using those as examples, but every now and then there's a fuck up. But if you go to editorial, or you go to the post-production supervisor and you say, we found this problem, we'll have it fixed, then there's never a problem. They're just like, oh, okay, thanks for letting us know. And it's like, we'll replace the data and that's it, problem done, you know? It's just, I think that everyone is always scared to fuck up, man. Everyone is scared to make a mistake. And life is just not, that's not life. That's not real, you know? You know, shit happens, man. Shit happens. Mistakes happen. And if you go into a situation putting yourself under that extra pressure to be completely perfect, then you're just going to fucking have anxiety.
That's amazing advice. That is absolutely amazing advice, Fergus. I think that that's something to live by. We're all going to make a mistake, but you know, there's always also a solution. And I think honestly, every time I've made a really big whopper, I've learned a huge amount. It's painful, but it's actually the way forward.
Yeah, but also you know what, the work you had to do to dig yourself out of it was where the real lesson was, right? So
Exactly.
it's like, you know, so it's like it's a beautiful lesson at the end of it.
Yeah.
So, you know, as tough as it's been, and you're still alive today to tell the story because
Yeah.
no one died
We
color
survived.
grading.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's true. It's true. We put ourselves under immense pressure. And I think that in dailies, like you were talking about earlier when you referred to it as the pinch point of the hourglass, there is an immense amount of pressure there because you're also responsible for the DOP's image during the dailies process and those people who are viewing the dailies. And I think that especially at the start of a shoot, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just speaking from my experience here. At the start of a shoot, there is a real sense of needing to make sure that everybody is well represented to the key stakeholders,
Yeah.
that this production is going to be as planned, as sold, as pitched, on time, to budget, and exceeding creative expectations.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong with the dailies color and the dailies are screened incorrectly, it can be disastrous, I think, for the DP and for the confidence in the pictures. And at the end of the day, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being spent to create these pictures. So the confidence needs to be very high. And I wondered if you could talk about the relationship with the DP in that context and, you know, how important is it to have their back? And I suppose I already know the answer is very important, but if you could maybe
well, again, I
talk
think
to me about
it goes back to the stuff I was saying earlier about you not just being a colorist in
that.
those situations. So what you've got to do is you present yourself as the eyes. So you make sure you look at all the deliverables and you double check those deliverables against what you saw in your suite. And at some point, you've got to go, okay, the process is working. But definitely in that first 2 weeks, you keep an eye on that stuff. You know, you look at the pics and you look at the Avid and you make sure that the calibration on the monitors in the editorial is as good as or close to your own. You can't control what people look at the pics on. Hopefully they look at it on an iPad Pro or something that's at least in a decent space. But you know, again, you've got a whole lot of things that you have to deal with there. There's always questions about compression and all that sort of stuff that happens, especially if you've got a movie like the ones I like to make with a little bit of balls in the blacks. Anyway, and but you know, it's I think it's at that point, and you have to be ready to be called into people's rooms and walk into there with not necessarily an air of confidence, but with your mind on the problem and not your mind on it's your problem. So you walk in the room because they're looking at you to know that it's right or wrong. They're not necessarily looking to blame you if it's wrong. So if you walk into a room and you see that the image is wrong, you then say, that doesn't look right. And you think about it and you work out backwards in your mind what the process is. And you'll solve the problem, right? So But I think it's like, again, it's all those things. It's just try not to be kind to yourself in those situations.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah, yeah. No, totally, totally.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. So can you tell me a little bit about when your job starts and when it finishes?
Oh, yeah,
And does
sure.
it finish?
Look, sadly, on some movies, it definitely finishes. Absolutely,
Right.
definitely finishes. And, and maybe after 4 months of stuff, you're happy it finished, you know? Not just because it's been a lot, not because of anything else, just because there's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, yeah. Of
Um,
course, of course.
but there are some projects I definitely would like to have gone on longer or to go all the way to the end, And I think that that's where I am now. I mean, so basically, like a big feature film, like a VFX film, like a Marvel film. I know that as soon as Dailies is over, that's gone. I probably won't see that again. It won't be part of my life. There'll be a whole machine that it goes into, and next time I'll see it, it'll be in the movie theater. And sometimes I walk in there, and I go, "Oh, that looks like what I did." And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It must be
sometimes I
fascinating.
go, "Oh, they changed that. Oh,
Yeah,
that's not what I did."
yeah.
And it's like it's a 50, not even 50-50. I don't even know what the score is on that one, but it's always interesting. But I think where things are technologically and where I feel I am experienced now, I feel like I'm in a position where I want to do it all.
Mm.
I want to do the dailies and look after the DP and have that conversation and be there for him doing that. And then I want to walk that film to the end and finish it,
And that does happen, even though it is extremely uncommon in the more CDL based world of dailies, where it's, you
Hmm.
get the CDL from the DIT, you apply it, and then you might make a few tweaks for consistency and send it along. In the kind of world that you're describing, where you're having much more of an in depth experience with the DP, there are a lot of relationships that have crossed over. Even though it used not to be the case, I think now there is far more acceptance of a crossover between those roles.
I mean, that's my hope, right? That's my hope. Look, and I think that that's just to put my experience in context. A lot of people do dailies and then become finishers. I kind of was finishing commercials and stuff, and working as a finishing colorist in Melbourne freelance when an opportunity from a friend turned up to go and work on Thor Ragnarok because he needed someone in Australia. It was a friend from LA. He needed someone in Australia to look after this film, a colorist that he trusted. So I got involved then, and that's when I started to make friends in this space. Um, and so it's it's been a different like rebranding, and now I'm trying to rebrand myself out of it again to be the finishing colorist, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. So,
Yeah.
instead of starting off doing the dailies grind that I think a lot of people do, or at least used to, I don't know how much now that's still a case, but there definitely used to be a feeder from dailies into finishing. Like you would go and sort of work in the trenches at one of the major studios in Sydney or the Gold Coast, and you might do that for a few years until you couldn't
Mm.
stand it anymore. And in that time, you make relationships with the DPs and you start to develop your chops and get the skills that you need to be the finishing colorist. Whereas you kind of flip that on its head, and you're a very celebrated and busy finishing colorist who happened into the extremely high end of dailies in Australia and kind of are known now for that. I think there definitely is an appetite now for dailies colorists to go through and be responsible for the final color. But like you say, just making people aware of that and making it work in the local market is the next step and the next challenge that you face. So
Absolutely.
what do you see as being the outcome or the way through that?
Well, I think the way through is just, I would like to, I want to reassure cinematographers that I'm going to look after them. That's primarily that, and that when production gets you on board, that they know that someone is going to hold their image and look after their image all the way to the end. You know, now I'm even in a situation where I don't necessarily even have to finish the end. You know, but I would like to be the person that looks after that image and makes sure that whoever finishes it is finishing it properly. You know, so it's kind of like I'm flexible how that could work. I just have a passion for pipeline. I have a passion for looks. And I think that sitting with any DP for any amount of time, I reckon that I can offer them great support, you know? I feel like, and this is something I've been discussing recently, is that maybe there needs to be a slight shift in the responsibility of who takes ownership of dailies as far as the production goes. Dailies sit in a weird space. As far as financing for dailies goes, it comes from the production. And the production, as I said earlier to you, is primarily concerned about, are the pictures safe? Are they going, can we strike sets? Can we clear cards, right? Post, obviously, very concerned about the image, and the DP is very concerned about the image. It kind of makes sense to me that dailies should probably be either post budget, but the problem is then the post budget is often where the deficits are, right? So maybe it should be the DPs, it should be in camera department. And camera department should take ownership of it. And that means they would also have ownership of it, you know? And so that they basically are supplying the rest of the pipeline with images from camera rather than going through this sort of island that is created by the way that dailies is put together. Often dailies is pitched with the finishing team. You know, the bigger post houses in LA often put their dailies team in place. But, you know, we in this country, we're in a slightly different dynamic to that, you know. And I think being the Davids to the Goliaths in this situation, we need to try and manipulate or work out a way that is good for our local market to work with anyone. And sort of, you know?
Right, I see what you're saying there, because often what will happen with Australia in particular is that we will see a large international production like the ones that Fergus has done the dailies for. We'll see the production happen in Australia, so in the Fox Studios in Sydney or on the Gold Coast in the Warner Brothers Village Roadshow studios there. But then after the production has wrapped, it's photography. Oftentimes the post-production is then taken back closer to the studio headquarters, whether they be in London or LA, and the completion of the post is done there in a way that I suppose is more manageable for the studio. But we do have extremely talented, as you can tell by speaking with Fergus, we have extremely talented local professionals who, you know, I think studios more and more are looking at taking advantage of the dollar difference and the government reinvestment deals that are available in Australia for large productions. And we may see more finishing happening in Australia in the future. So, you know, having people who can do that and can do that well, I think is going to be crucial to getting the global confidence in us as a you know, really talented creative place to come and finish your film.
I think that's beautifully put, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's very succinct. I like that.
I'd love to bring it back to the day-to-day for one final question for you, which is, what do you use to do your dailies color? Is there a particular software or hardware, and do you have a preference for any of them?
Well, they definitely have a preference, but I use all sorts of things, to be honest with you. I've used Bayside, Daylight, so they're kind of interchangeable. I've used OSD from Colorfront, and I've used Resolve from Blackmagic. Right. They all have their idiosyncrasies, and they all have their strengths. My personal preference is the Daylight Bayslight setup. I think the color management for a start in there is superior. That's a great starting point for a colorist and an image person. I just think it solves a lot of problems and gives you a lot of confidence. So once you know that's dealt with, you can kind of get on with your job. But the actual managing multiple cameras, multiple days, multiple scenes, be able to sort, search, reference, do all that. It's just hands down so much easier and so much smarter in the Filmlight gear than it is in any other piece of software. If I have 4 cameras, I can call up the metadata on the 4 cameras, have them locked by time code. So I'm looking at the same frame from 4 different angles. I can match them all. I can then peel it all out into all the takes for each of the different cameras, match all those, pick another take, then rematch back to the 4 different angles and make sure they're still all 4 the same. And I can do it so fast and so furiously that it just actually makes a pleasure to do. Whereas if I'm trying to work out where was that shot from the other day, and where's the other roll? Fuck, it's in another timeline. And it's just like it just becomes just this a head fuck in a lot of other software. I think I Resolve for finishing and doing that sort of stuff is really excellent as well. I'm not going to say Resolve is bad, but OSD for me is very much about processing power and about doing things fast and like churning and burning. And it doesn't feel like it's a tool that you can finesse with.
And so when you're working in Bayside Daylight, when Filmlight Daylight, you're creating what we were talking about before, which is a BLG grade. And within that grade, you can hold your base grade, any of your other Bayside operators. You can hold your shapes.
It can do that, but also we can drive it just as a CDL grading system, which is what.
So you don't have to do all of that.
So it's when it comes to just doing the wonderful thing about the Bayslight tool is you can build these layers which are, specific for a job. So you can build each layer can be, layer 1 and 2 can have just the tools you need for that particular job. And that you can template your whole thing to work super tight, with media import tools, and the framing setup in there is amazing. There's just a whole lot of, formats, auto formats that load the right frame lines, all that stuff that I touched on earlier. They just do it in such a way that is super intuitive and
that's got to be so useful. It's got to be so much. You've got to be able to rely on your program, especially when you're doing long hours and there's room for human error.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can have that, and it'll just spit out a ALE with CDL values in at the end. It doesn't have to be that whole overcomplicated. But the wonderful thing about the Daylight system is that it has all the tools that a Bayslight has, so you can go that whole way. And if a DP walks in, and even if you don't use them, and a DP walks in, you can build him whatever look he wants and do. He might say, "What happens if we throw a shape around this to that?" And they go, "Okay, can you send me a still of that?" And he'll just, that's it. It'll only ever last as a still, and he'll have that as a reference in his thing. And when he walks to the DI, he said, "I liked it when it looked like this."
Yes.
So.
And so, can you tell me how? I suppose without being in the DI, you don't know necessarily, but you do have some overlap with the DI colorists, and you do have relationships with the finishers who take over the dailies on especially these jobs that you've been more integral in creating a look for, you do have an overlap and you do sort of hand over your baby at the end of dailies.
Yeah.
Do they use that as a starting point?
The first two jobs I did with Bob, which were A Private War and Venom, there was definitely a handover. The colorist, Matt Watson, who finished Private War, was colorist in London, and him and I talked about, we discussed how we were going to approach the grade and, the different, how we wanted to do our, order of operations as far as color process went. So we just, we started off from the beginning. It was a dialogue from the start. And again, the same. Venom was supposed to be initially was Ivan Lucas was going to do Venom, but then Elodie came in and I had to fly back here to start Chang-Chi. And so she came in and finished some of the Venom dailies, and she ended up finishing the job. So her and I had a whole discussion at that point. Ivan and I had the discussion at the beginning, and we had a handover where I talked her through all my stuff that I've been doing for the past 3 months, and then she finished it off and took the film to the finish line. So, those jobs, excellent. I love that dialogue. It's just a part of being included in stuff.
And I think that in the service of the pictures as well, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about who does what. It's making sure that the pictures are put first through this whole incredibly complicated process that we do.
I like your utopian attitude. I'm down. But I think there are other people that would disagree with us. So.
Right. Well, they're not talking to us right now, so we don't care. But honestly, I mean, it can't be a bad thing to have multiple people who have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and very sharp eyes, helping to take those images and move them through that pipeline.
100%. I think that's why, a lot of these bit bigger films end up having multiple colorists on them, They have a senior colorist that oversees everything, and then there's other guys underneath, and everyone does the work. Senior colorist has the final word to say that needs to be this or this needs to be that, and I think we should do this, or and I think that's the way things should be. Yeah.
I 1000% agree with you on that. Yeah. I've also had the privilege of being in color teams and seeing what you can get out. It's much greater than the sum of its parts if everybody's respectful and collaborating in a respectful manner. So, oh gosh, I could talk to you about this literally forever, but I know that you're a very busy person, and you've been extremely generous in explaining some of these concepts. And I think there might be a few questions in the comment section when this goes up about some of the terms that we've used. So please let me know if you need anything clarified. I'd be very happy to do that for whoever's listening or watching right now, because we kind of did a deep dive there into the process, and a lot of 3-letter acronyms came flying
definitely
out.
A deep dive into my dark and dim mind, but
Well, I love that. I love it any day of the week, Fergus. You're an absolute delight, and can't stress enough just how incredibly smart and experienced you are, and how lucky I am to have this access to be able to speak to you today about it. So,
it's been a pleasure to chat. I really have enjoyed it. Thank you very much for asking me. And also, I'm always around if you ever need to chat. So.
Great. Well, we'll do a follow-up and a year from now and see what's changed.
Yeah, we'll see. Well,
now
we're on constantly evolving.
Absolutely, like this whole industry is. I mean, I think once you get to the end of a film, you work out how you should be doing it, and then it's all different for the next one. So
yeah, absolutely. That's 100% true.
For Mixing Light, I'm Kaylee Bateman, and this has been a conversation with Fergus Hally. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.